Hello and a very warm welcome indeed to Quadriga. And this week we're once again turning our attention to the Middle East conflict that in recent days exploded into the deadliest violence in the region in 5 years, and where tensions have again flared between Washington and Tehran over Iran's threatened partial withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear deal. In Israel, even the singers and musicians taking part in next week's Eurovision Song Contest carried out rehearsals against a backdrop of sirens and detonations. The radical Islamist Hamas group fired hundreds of rockets into Israel, which responded with airstrikes on 350 militant targets inside Gaza. The result, more dead and wounded on both sides. So what has triggered the latest violence, and will it shortly be resumed? So our question on Quadriga this week is Middle East conflict, no song of peace? And to discuss that question, I'm joined here in the studio by Hassan Khader, an independent writer who commutes between Ramallah and Berlin and says the two-state solution is the only possible and realistic option in town. Also with us is Posener, regular commentator for the Berlin-based daily Die Welt, who says there will be no peace for the Jewish state as long as Iranian-backed terrorists rule the Gaza Strip. And a warm welcome too to Deutsche Welle's own Shani Rozanes, who's a producer and commentator with DW. Now, Shani argues that for peace to come, leadership on both sides needs to take bold steps. Thank you, all three, once again for being here today. And I'd like to begin with you, Hassan Khader, and ask you to tell us what people in the Palestinian territories, particularly in Gaza, are saying about the latest violence and about the latest ructions between Iran and the US, Iran and much of the rest of the world, many would say.
Well, I can say that people in Gaza are really helpless, and they find themselves in a vicious circle, and they don't know how to get out of it. They are not happy with the rule of Hamas, for sure. And if we will have elections tomorrow, I'm not sure that Hamas will win. This is one thing, but...
You're not sure that Hamas would win, but you said that everybody is against Hamas.
Yeah, it's just putting it in a mild way. Hamas will lose for sure, yes, in Gaza. So this is one point. The second, people in Gaza, they find themselves between Mr. Netanyahu, right-wing government, and Hamas rule in Gaza. And both of them, in fact, are depending on each other. And Mr. Netanyahu is authorizing and permitting cash money transfer from Israel to Hamas in order to pay salaries of their people. So when you ask about people in Gaza...
So this is what some people call the symbiosis between Hamas and Prime Minister Netanyahu, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, this is what Aaron David Miller said or wrote a few weeks ago in the Foreign Affairs.
Explain who David Miller is for our viewers.
He was a high official in the Obama administration and an intellectual, I mean, in American Jewish community, and a contributor to the Foreign Affairs. And he wrote that there are two enemies who claim that they want to destroy each other, but in fact they are depending on each other. Mm-hmm. And this is the vicious circle. So when you ask about people in Gaza, they are helpless.
But nevertheless, Shani, Prime Minister Netanyahu says the campaign is not over, and he adds the situation requires patience and judgment. What do you expect next from Mr. Netanyahu?
Well, it's hard to tell. I think he would first like to get his ducks in a row, get the government building mission done, have his own coalition, and then move forward, especially considering the fact next week we see the Eurovision Song Contest. Today, Thursday this week, we have the Independence Day for Israel this week. For Israel is a very special week in the national, ethos, everybody coming together. He wouldn't want any controversy, any talks about war or bombs, nonetheless, like we've had last week in the South, to be casting a shadow over that particular time. I think Netanyahu is... He keeps that option on the table because this ambiguity is the only card he's been playing for a long time. Even the ceasefire brokered with Hamas is never officially acknowledged, never officially announced by Israeli side. It's always going through third side mediation and third side announcements of what's happening. I won't be surprised if we will see escalation coming around, let's say, late June, early July.
What do you think, Alan? We just have the list from Shani there, the killings on both sides, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Eurovision Song Contest, the ructions between Iran and the US and others. It's a potent cocktail. What do you make of it?
Well, first, I take umbrage at this, what you said about killings on both sides. Let's be clear about this. There was an attack from the Gaza Strip on Israel, unprovoked, premeditated terror, which killed innocent civilians. And, by the way, also killed civilians in Gaza, because one rocket, which didn't reach Israel, landed on a house, killed a mother and her child, which was blamed on Israel, repeated by the Western media, for hours and hours and hours after Israel denied this. This is the reality in Israel. And we saw it in the opening clip. Israel has been subject to a terrorist attack, which no other nation would have responded.
There were killings on both sides.
Well, obviously, if you respond, it's like saying there were killings on both sides after 9/11. America was attacked, America and the world struck back. That's what Israel does. That's what the terrorists who rule the Gaza Strip. And let's be quite clear, Hamas is a designated terrorist organization which rules as dictators over Gaza. And after we've heard a couple of weeks ago there were protests in Gaza, food protests and so on, they attack Israel, because that's always a good idea, isn't it? Hassan, let's attack the Jews. That's always what people do.
Let's listen to what Gaza-born Hassan has to say about
Well, I
that.
think I can quote Haaretz. What you said is completely wrong. Who started? And it's something like which is first, the egg or the hen? No, I mean in Haaretz. If you read Haaretz carefully in the last few days, then you will get a different impression, and that the provocation was coming from the Israeli side. But this is not the point. Who is provoking? I mean the other. This is not a good point at all. The point is the virtuous circle, and the point is why there is no possibility of breaking this virtuous circle and getting out of it in order to save lives, both in Gaza and in southern Israel. This is the point. But who started and who is... No, this is not the
point made. Shani?
Well, first of all, I want to commend Ellen for the heat, and the passion in this discussion, because it seems like people from the outside maybe are far more passionate about it almost than people from the region that are just somewhat fed up. We know this circle, we know this routine of attacks, counterattacks, and ceasefire, money transfer, and it seems like, and that's I think somewhat of what my distinguished colleague here was saying. We need to break that pattern. Somebody needs to break that pattern. Nobody is surprised. Nobody, I think, in the region even deals anymore with who started.
One way to break the pattern would be, I have a quote from an Israeli man from Ashdod, where one man was killed in a rocket attack in recent days, point made. This Israeli gentleman said, when we have the upper hand, we need to once and for all finish the terror, because it will repeat itself and it will not stop. Do you agree with that sentiment, Alan? We need to finish the terror, wipe out?
No, there's no.
What is wipe out terror? Let's say it. Wipe out Gaza. Is that what it means? What does it mean, wiping out terror? How do you do that otherwise?
I understand there. I understand. So you're saying people who are there are actually not as seated as I am. Peter's just told us that actually people who are exposed to the attacks respond even harder, with even more emotion than I do, and I would if I lived in Ashkelon or Ashdod. And we've all been there. We know what it's like.
I'm not trying to belittle that. I think people in the south are suffering, people in Gaza are suffering, people in the West Bank are suffering. There's no doubt there's real human suffering in here.
So if we've established that, then the question is, you can't wipe out terror. George W. Bush tried it with the war on terror. We've been fighting this war on terror. Germany is part of the fight from Afghanistan to Mali, and that's not, it's a long war, right? But part of this war is not to attack the periphery, which Gaza is, but to attack the centre, and that's Tehran. Tehran, which is now walking away from the atomic agreement. Behind all the conflicts that you see in this region, you have Tehran. They are the people who encourage the Syrian dictator Bashar to massacre his people. They are the people who are behind Hezbollah. They are the people who are behind Hamas. They are the people who are behind the civil war in Yemen. It's all down to the theocracy in Tehran.
Something to say. Well, this is what in the Camp David negotiations, when Begin was negotiating with Sadat, he was always telling him that let us agree on this agreement. So now let us agree with this agreement. I don't agree with you. It's the Palestinian problem, question, whatever you call it, started decades before Tehran, and it's different. If you are talking about support, I think the main support, Hamas in Gaza is getting support from the Qatar.
Qatar is an ally of Tehran.
Yes, but
and this is an ally of the United States, and they have very good relations with Mr. Netanyahu government. So, I mean, don't look for or don't connect everything together in order to make such an argument that it's a war on terror and Tehran, and this is the center. This is not the point.
What you're saying is it's a Jewish conspiracy.
The Palestinian-Israeli conflict started many, many decades before, and unfortunately, before Iran, I mean, unfortunately, it will, or it may still be many decades after Tehran, and this is the problem.
Okay,
do I have a second? Assuming we buy Ellen's theory, it's all about Iran, and it might just be. But even the Israeli government is not speaking unison. Even Netanyahu himself, who is the master of depicting Iran as the head of the snake and so on, he's very much under the table, complying with Qatari intervention into Gaza with money transfers. We're talking millions and millions every month. And Qatar and Iran are allies. We're talking, if we're talking in the axis, we're talking Qatar, Iran against Saudi Arabia and American forces, where Israel should be aligned with. So Netanyahu himself is letting Irani allies into the backyard of his own...
No, but I love this argument. Everyone says, Gaza is the biggest concentration camp in the world. Nothing gets in there. The poor people of Gaza. And then you're saying, oh, but Israel lets millions of dollars from Qatar in there. True, there is no blockade. These people are not poor.
I'm just trying to break this charade of Iran. It's a charade game. Everybody has an interest of they're prompting their own political stands by waving the other side as making it the enemy, but then nothing changes. Everybody wins. Everybody stays in power. Just people suffer.
OK, let's take one step back for a moment. Alan mentioned Gaza, smaller than the Norwegian capital Oslo. Its population is 3 times as high. That is some 2 million people. And there's no doubt about it, the territory is a tough place to live.
Survival is a challenge in the stony waste of the Gaza Strip. The economy is in ruins. Unemployment is stuck around 40%. People do everything they can just to scrape by.
Economic activity is non-existent in Gaza. We're exhausted.
The situation was made even worse when the U.S. froze aid funding for the UN Relief and Works Agency. The health system in Gaza is also on the verge of collapse, while the population is soaring. The ongoing power struggle between rival factions Hamas and Fatah have made the situation even more precarious. For a year now, Palestinian anger has been unleashed in protests staged at the border fence with Israel. An estimated 200 Palestinians have died so far. Thousands more have been injured. Is the dream of a lasting ceasefire impossible in the midst of hopelessness?
Hassan, Khader, Gaza, a place of no hope, a place that is, as people sometimes say, unlivable. Is it true?
Yeah, it is
Tell
true.
us about it.
It is true, because there is a water problem. There is no water, almost no water, and it's surrounded. I mean, the sea and Egyptian border, the Israeli border, it's cut, and it is not one. It is the most densely populated place on Earth. And if I want to quote Noam Chomsky, he said it's the biggest open-air prison in the world. So this is Gaza.
This is Chomsky.
Yeah, why not? And if I want
Alan
to
is
quote
indicating
another
that he's
Israeli
heard it
minister,
all
he
before.
was calculating
It's
the
all-
calories that people in Gaza need on daily consumption of food.
It's
Actually, Berlin-Kreuzberg is more densely populated than Gaza. This is, I mean, you know, these are all the things that they get water from Israel, they get electricity from Israel. If people are having a hard time in Gaza, it's because they get money from UNRWA, from the United Nations. If people are having a hard time in Gaza, it's because the elite of Hamas are as corrupt as the elite in Venezuela, in Tehran, Saudi Arabia, name it, because they are siphoning off the money from themselves. It's
Shani,
not because of any Israeli blockade.
Well, I think that what I would like to suggest, and this is exactly what I'm trying to talk about the whole time, how we break this cycle. I think Israel has been fallen in love with using only sticks in the last 10, 15 years and forgot about the idea of carrots as well as incentives and maybe a tool of influence and policy. And I think if when I'm talking about bold moves, there's no doubt there needs to be change and some bold moves within the Palestinian leadership, both in Hamas and PLO in the West Bank. Their conundrum for itself is also a big part, needs to be put as big part of the blame of the misery of the Palestinian people. But again, if we're trying, I'm just so sick of this blame game. And I'm trying to think, okay, how do we try to make something better? How do we try to improve? How do we try to make ourselves, to prevent ourselves from sitting here in another year or in even a few months talking again about the same problems? And I'm thinking, how about trying to find different ways? How about trying to say, okay, we want to help. I mean, there will be Qatari support, there will be also European support. If you want to break this cycle, we want to bring Gaza into a place where it can sustain itself economically. How do we do that? Which carrots do we use? We're talking about the gas reservoirs and, on the Gaza shores. We're talking maybe about an airport, all sorts of infrastructure investments that Israel so far has been very reluctant in promoting or supporting for all sorts of reasons. Some of them, headed by military fears of what this would mean. But I find it to be that Israel's superiority, military superiority, is such that what would even when things go wrong, then what? I mean, it could be so easy for Israel to get the other hand, to remain in the upper hand. Why not try some carrots for a change?
Yeah, well,
instead only just sticks.
The carrots are coming. The Trump plan is coming. We all know what the Trump plan is going to entail. It's going to be a two-state. Yeah, of course.
Give me an insight.
Okay, so. There's going to be a Palestinian.
I didn't think I would walk away from the discussion today knowing
this in Haaretz.
I'm very interested.
You could read this in Haaretz a couple of weeks ago. There's going to be two states, but the Palestinian state, including Gaza, with a land bridge between Gaza and the West Bank, and they're not going to have control over their airspace. They're not going to have control over the Jordan Valley to prevent terrorism. And there's going to be massive investment in desalination plants on the Gaza shore. They're going to get their own harbour and their airport, but controlled by Israel. And we know why Israel needs to do that.
You're talking about the Palestinians as though they are absolutely second-class citizens of the world.
I am not at all talking about the Palestinians. I am talking about legitimate needs of control. When Germany was under... before Germany was reunited, the Allies also had control over elements of our airspace and so on. And if you wanted to go to Berlin, you had to go through a certain channel and so on. These are things, air corridor, these are things that you need to keep the peace. I'm not talking about Palestinians as second-class citizens. I'm talking about giving them citizenship of their own country.
There is
OK, just one second. I'll come back to you immediately, Hassan. I mean, we're talking now about Donald Trump. He's had a huge impact in the region. Let's just get a flavour of where he is coming from in this debate, because he's playing an increasingly important role here.
Moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem a year ago was a major policy shake-up on the part of Donald Trump. Among those attending the opening ceremony was his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The presidential advisor plans to present a peace plan for the region this summer. Then last March, the U.S. officially recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. The mountainous region in the country's northeast was part of Syria until 1967, but Israel has occupied it ever since the end of the Six-Day War. The range has important military significance for Israel as a buffer zone and would give it a strategic advantage in the event of any military conflict with Syria. After making so many decisions so heavily in Israel's favor, can the U.S. under President Trump still be a credible mediator in ongoing conflicts in the Middle East?
Is Mr. Trump a credible mediator? Would you buy the deal off of him?
Not at all, not at all. And I don't understand what is the deal of the century and what will come out of it, but I want to emphasize the fact that Mr. Trump is creating this or implanting the seeds of destruction in different places in the world, including the United States. His voters, some of them are anti-Semites. Mr. Netanyahu and the right-wing government think that with Trump they can bring the conflict with the Palestinians into a happy end. This is an illusion. The extremist who was shooting the Jews in the synagogue in the United States was a supporter of Mr. Trump.
That's not true. I mean,
just a moment, please.
No, you cannot say he, in his manifest, the Pittsburgh shooter, called Trump a tool of the Jews. Now, don't fake news, please.
Khader, he never said that. He said that. Never. Did I say?
It's in his manifest. Everyone knows that.
This is no.
Just like the Queensland shooter was an anti-Semite.
We're running out of time. I'd just like to come back to a point. One German magazine this week said that the Palestinians would likely be tempted to buy the deal that is going to be offered to them because it will give them the things that Alan is talking about: houses, swimming pools, schools for their kids, and all this.
Okay, when we have the deal, we can talk about it. I'm not sure about
You're not confident?
I'm not sure about the deal, and I'm not sure that it will come out soon. And I'm not sure that 30 or 40 years old Jared Kushner was
Jared Kushner,
yeah, and the real estate lawyer Greenblatt are really able to solve or offer a plan because it is not a real estate conflict. It is not, what Jesus says, it's not by bread only that man can live. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not about billions of dollar investment.
I would like to hear what Shani has to say about it, because you were talking about the carrots and the sticks. Are there enough, do you sense that there are going to be enough carrots in this package to somehow...
I'm not as confident as Alan, I have to say. I do hope that this deal of the century will be a comprehensive package that will offer some carrots as well. We have to keep in mind when you bring it to you talk about bringing it to the Palestinians, and then two issues here. First of all, is the complete break of confidence in Trump and his government, the lack of willingness to talk, negotiate, have any contact whatsoever. That's one thing. And then the second is, who are the Palestinians? Who is their leadership? Who is the official, legitimate representatives of the Palestinians? If you look at Gaza, if you could say, OK, Hamas is leading Gaza, we're having people in Hamas, from Gaza themselves telling us Hamas is not a true, authentic representative, of who we are, what we believe in, what we want. I doubt you would agree this is jihadi Islamic Jihad that are representing, then who is? Definitely you don't see the PLO strong enough in Gaza to be the one representing the Palestinians. If you go to the West Bank, we're talking about a president who is in his mid-80s with a very weak health condition, hasn't had elections in about, I'd say...
15 years.
15 years in the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinians themselves, even giving this opportunity, I'm not sure they can rise to the event and actually seize it. It's that's even without discussing problems on the Israeli side. Yeah, it's... You don't even have to think Middle East problems can be so easily solved. You too, Alan, so it seems...
No, I totally expect that the Palestinians will reject it. They will reject any deal. They will reject any deal because they don't really want the two-state solution anymore. And their backers don't
We have
want
to give
How
Hassan
can you talk on their
a minute
behalf?
to respond. A minute.
Yeah,
you
I mean, it's not fair, really.
Jesus said, you will
just-
see them on their fruits, judge them by their fruits. And we've seen the Palestinians reject everything,
Okay,
always.
just a moment. You have no right to talk on behalf of the Palestinians.
No, none of us do.
And also to come to a conclusion into how they will deal with the situation. So let us wait for the deal of the century, and we will talk about it.
And despite the fact that we never got to talk about the Eurovision Song Contest, I have music in my ear telling me that we have to wind down. We've been talking about conflict and peace in the Mideast. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought and some emotion on top. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye and tschüss.